Good morning. And before we start our first hymn, Bring Many Names, I want to explain a couple things about, this is the 30th anniversary of the publication of our new hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition. It may be the last hymnal that Unitarian Universalists ever published, because most of our churches now have screens, so that if we want to introduce a new hymn, instead of this expensive process of publishing it a hymnal, if we can get copyright permission, we can just put it on the screen. But it's a great hymnal. My friend and colleague Mark Bellatini was chair of the Hymnal Commission, and he told me that he talked with the chair of the Hymnal Commission for the Methodist Church about this hymn, Bring Many Names. And this was carefully considered, Brian Wren's hymn, by the Methodists, and they finally decided it was way too controversial for Methodists to have in their hymnal. And so we have, this is one of the reasons why it's great to be a Unitarian Universalist instead of a Methodist. We can sing this hymn. Brian Rim wrote this with the names like different names for God, Strong Mother God, Warm Father God, Old Aching God, and he hoped that people would add their own images of what God might be to this and expand the song. So we could go from 6 verses to 8 or 10 verses someday on this one. It's a beautiful hymn. And then when we close today, we're going to sing Amazing Grace 205. When the Hymnal Commission back in the early 90s did a survey of Unitarian Universalists and asked them, what hymn do we not have in our old blue hymnal that you really want to have in the new one? The answer over and over again was Amazing Grace. But that was then, there was another controversy, which is that half the people who said they wanted to sing Amazing Grace said, but I don't want to sing the word wretch. The Amazing Grace had saved a wretch like me, because I'm not a wretch, and I'm uncomfortable with that. The other half said, well, that's the way it was originally written. They know the history of the Amazing Grace was that the man who wrote it, John Newton, was a slave trader, and he realized what he was doing was wretched. He was off the coast of Ireland with a boat full of slaves and sailed them, I think, back to England, as the story goes, and wrote this hymn, and then was a very strong opponent of slavery as a result. So that's where the word wretch comes from. But if you're uncomfortable saying that you're a wretch, there's an asterisk in the hymnal, and you can sing at the end of the service, you can sing soul instead. It's your choice. Let's sing our opening hymn, Bring Many Names.
please remain standing while we recite our covenant, and I'd like to invite Joyce McKee to light our candle this morning, or chalice. Enriched by our differences and joined together in our search for meaning, we covenant with ourselves and each other to seek truth in the spirit of love, to strive for justice, and to serve others with a joyful heart. Please be seated. Good morning, I'm Joe Miller. I'm so glad to be here with you this morning, both in the sanctuary and online. I know Joyce probably beats me out on this one, but I've been attending this church since 1995. What do you think, Joyce?
Yeah, I think I was here about 30 years before.
Yeah. See. I've done a number of things around the church. One of them was being board president, and I see Bill Clinton and others, Jody Malloy here, who have been board president as well. And this is a important spiritual home for me. One of the things I enjoy most, one of the events I enjoy most, was not being board president. It's the event that comes up in 2 weeks, chili chocolate homebrew. Wonderful food, a lot of fun, and most important, being together as a community. We've taken, I think, a 3-year break, 2-year? Whatever. And so it's a wonderful time. And if you haven't had the experience before, I really suggest you come out. And if you had, I know you'll be here in 2 weeks. And it's not just about, the cooking by the adults, but kids get to be in the competition too, right? So were there any kids that remember submitting chocolate in past years, huh? Anybody? I know some of you did. Maybe you didn't win. I feel your pain. I lose every year to Derek Schweitzer in the brewing contest. And I know he's got something pretty incredible this year, as well as wonderful chilies and lots of chocolate, and just lots of fellowship. So I really emphasize, please come out. You'll have a wonderful time. Okay? If you haven't signed up yet, I know we're still signing folks up, right? Good. Okay. So let's settle into our worship this morning. Stay seated with our centric song. Each Sunday, we gather in community, carrying whatever emotions we experience. We may be full of joy or sorrow, and we honor those feelings by dropping stones in this bowl of water. Just as the stones are held by the water, so are all who drop them held in the love of this community. Please file up the aisle over toward the window and return down the center aisle. We invite you to join in this ritual. And those online can join us by entering joys and sorrows in the chat. And Joyce, could you put one more stone in, if there are any left over there, for all those joys and sorrows that go unspoken this morning? God does not judge us by the separate incidents or the separate mistakes we make, but by the total bent of our lives. I want you all to know this morning that I am a sinner, like all of God's children. But I want to be a good man, woman. And I want to hear a voice saying to me one day, I take you and I bless you because you tried. Reading from the Dr. Martin Luther King. Please stay seated as we sing Spirit of Life. This being the second Sunday of the month, it is our Share the Plate Sunday. Typically, our donations go to the church, but on the second Sunday, they go to an organization in our community that is doing wonderful work. And this week it goes to the Chester Children's Course, which is a program of Swarthmore University. And it provides year-round music and math and education to the children of Chester. During the school year, children and youth ages 7 through 18 develop their vocal talents through rehearsals and concerts. In addition, they develop their math skills through small group and individualized instructions. This program helps kids succeed academically and personally. We ask you to be generous.
Good morning. Good morning. Let me make sure my mic is on. Yep. Hello, everyone. So I have a story today, and this is one of those stories that when you search for it, it comes up with a lot of different attributions. Sometimes it's listed as a story from India. Sometimes I've seen it as a Jewish folk tale. Sometimes it's just like a story or a traditional tale. So I don't know where this story comes from. But it goes like this. There was an old woman. She was an old, wise woman, and everyone in the town said that she knew the answer to every question. She knew all of the answers to all of the questions. So people talked to her all the time. They wanted to come and see. So for example, if someone was sick, the family members might go to the old woman's house and ask her for ideas, and she would suggest plants that might heal the person. And it always worked. Or if neighbors were arguing with each other, they might go to the old woman's house and ask her to help them sort out their argument. And she would listen to both sides, and she would talk to them, and they would be friends again. It was wonderful. But the children in the town thought, you know what? I don't believe this. I don't think this woman really knows all the answers to everything. So they decided they would test her. They would ask her lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of questions to see if she really knew the answer to everything. Perhaps you have had a child ask you lots and lots and lots and lots of questions. And that's great, because that means that those children are learning. They want to know the answers, right? And so that's what the children in the town did. They went to the old woman and they asked her all the questions they could think of. And you know what? She answered all of their questions. And they started to believe that she had all of the answers, just like everyone in the town did. But there was one boy, and he was not convinced. And he decided he would try to find a way to get the woman to have the wrong answer, to discredit her, to prove that there was no way she could know all of the answers. So this little boy went and he caught a bird. Okay? And he held the bird in his hands, and he held it behind his back so she couldn't see. And he walked up to the old woman's house, and he knocked on her door. Maybe like with his head, I don't know how that works. But he knocked on her door, and she opened the door, and she said, "Can I help you?" And the boy said, yes, I want you to tell me what's behind my back. And he said, I want you to tell me what's behind my back because you know everything. You know the answers to all the questions. And the old woman said, well, I know that people say that I know everything, but I don't claim to know everything. Nobody can know everything. But when you were walking up, I did hear the rustle of feathers. And so I think you have a bird behind your back. Now the little boy was so mad. He thought he had figured out how to trick the old woman. He thought he was going to get her to be wrong. So he came up with an idea. It was a devious idea. Devious is a word that means tricky but also mean and probably not a good idea. He came up with a devious idea, and his devious idea was this. He would ask the old woman if the bird was alive or dead. If the old woman said that the bird was alive, the boy would squish the bird in his hands and kill it. And then the old woman would be wrong because the bird would be dead. But if the old woman said the bird was dead, the boy would release the bird would be alive, and the old woman would still be wrong. Either way, she would be wrong. So the boy said to the woman, you're right, I have a bird in my hands, but is it alive or dead? Think in your head what you think the old woman's gonna do. Just think for a second, and then I'll tell you. So the old woman, she thought for a long time. And she said, you are asking me whether the bird is alive or dead, but I will tell you the answer is in your hands. The answer is in your hands. And the boy thought about it, and he knew the old woman was right once again. The answer was in his hands. He could choose whether the bird was alive or dead. And he made the right choice. He pulled his hands in front, and he held the poor little squirming bird, and he let it go. And he apologized to the bird, because the answer was in his hands. Thank you for listening to my story this morning. In just a minute, Joy's going to play our sending song. I know we have some new kids in RE this morning, so the way this works, we sing this song together, everyone, and then we'll sing it another time, and our teachers will go into the lobby, and then the third time we sing the song, children will go into the lobby and they'll go to their RE classes. Pickup from RE is in your classrooms at 10:45. Please try to be on time. Thank you.
Please remain seated and turn in your hymnal, the old new hymnal, to responsive reading number 584. That's 584. And I'll read the first part, and you'll respond with the part in italics. All right? And this is from the Reverend Martin Luther King, A Network of Mutuality. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
Thank you. Well, in May, you will have a special congregational meeting to elect a ministerial search committee to spend a year searching for a new settled minister to recommend to your congregation. Now, in preparation for that process, I want to tell you the story of another church's experience selecting ministers. Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, was founded in 1877. It's located near the Alabama State Capitol. From the beginning, Dexter Avenue operated as a deacon's church, which means that the lay officers of the church were free to call any preacher they wanted without regard to bishops assigning them a minister or other church hierarchy beyond them choosing who their leader would be. In 1948, the 300-member church was looking for a new minister. Now, that summer of 1948, Alabama State, a public historical black university in Montgomery, Alabama, Alabama State hired a new music professor, Antona Trent Johns. The deacons at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, many of whom worked at Alabama State University, invited her husband, the Reverend Vernon Johns, to deliver a trial sermon. Reverend Johns did so, and he so impressed the deacons that they offered Reverend Johns the position of minister without any further investigation and without a second trial sermon. Many years later, one of the deacons said that during his trial period at the church, Reverend Johns was very professional. He displayed that type of intelligence that would fit the congregation. His Master's of Divinity degree was from the University of Chicago Divinity School. We had a different Vernon Johns to start with, but after having been there for a period of time, the real Vernon Johns came out. And of course, we were stuck with him then. Well, I've collected stories, mostly that I found in the book Parting the Waters by Taylor Branch, and on the internet, I've collected stories about Reverend John's ministry, most of which are probably true. After arriving, Reverend Johns replaced the small sign in front of the church with a much bigger one, which he then used to announce his sermon topics to anyone passing by, including people on their way to the state capitol. One title of one sermon was Segregation After Death. Now, the police saw the sign and called him to the station to explain the sermon title, Segregation After Death. He told the police that he did not believe there would be segregation after death because all the whites who support segregation in this life were going to hell. In the spring of 1949, a series of murders occurred. In one, a white man on his porch shot a black man running down the street. The white man got his double-barreled shotgun and shot the black man dead. He said, if he was running, he must have done something wrong. The black leadership in the community grumbled behind closed doors. They voiced no public protest, with one exception. The following week, Reverend Johns posted on the sign outside his church this sermon topic: "It is safe to kill Negroes in Montgomery." It is safe to kill Negroes in Montgomery. Well, this made the newspapers. Newspapers reported that Johns was going to speak this sermon Sunday morning. The white community was up in arms. An all-white grand jury was then in session. They charged that Vernon Johns was inciting people to riot, and they subpoenaed him to appear. Johns appeared in court and answered the questions put to him, carefully pointing out that a black man had indeed been shot and killed in broad daylight, that nothing had been done to bring his murderer to justice, and that until an arrest was made, the words on the signboard outside his church were no more than a statement of fact. It is safe to kill Negroes in Montgomery. A judge decided to let Johns deliver the sermon because he thought it would be the lesser evil, saying, "The whites of Montgomery will pay more attention to you if I stop you." Saturday night before the sermon, someone burned a cross in front of the church. The service was packed with people. The police parked across the street from the church. Occasionally they would rev the engines of their police cars to try to drown out the sermon inside. Johns raised all the church windows so that people who couldn't get into the church because it was so crowded, people standing outside could hear what he was saying. In the sermon, he predicted that violence against Negroes would continue as long as they let it happen. Johns said, "Last week, a white man was fined for shooting a rabbit out of season. But of course, it's safe to murder Negroes. A rabbit is better off than a Negro." I'll tell you why it's safe to murder Negroes. Because Negroes stand by and let it happen. No one could predict what to expect from Vernon Johns when he stepped into the pulpit. Unlike me, he didn't have a manuscript. He just stepped into the pulpit and started preaching. Whatever came into his mind, he said. One Sunday, heads turned to watch as Dr. Trenholm, president of Alabama State University, the largest employer of Montgomery blacks in general, and of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church members in particular, Dr. Trenholm, President Trenholm, arrived late and eased himself into a pew. Reverend Johns said from the pulpit, "I want to pause here in the service until Dr. Trenholm can get himself seated on his semi-annual visit to the church. Dr. Trenholm never returned to Dexter Church while Johns was its minister. On his days off, Johns sold fish and vegetables to members of the community. He felt that university faculty people were consumers but not producers, and real producers are folks who grew things on their farms. And he started a garden in the parsonage, in the backyard of the parsonage. On Sunday, he would hold up vegetables for all the congregation to see. And he would say, "Now, just to show you what can be produced on a small piece of land, I grew this in the back of the parsonage, and I left the roots on to prove that they are not store-bought." According to one story, Johns was officiating at an elegant wedding ceremony. This is a story that Coretta Scott King liked to tell. Johns was officiating at an elegant wedding ceremony for one of the most outstanding Negro families in Montgomery, in the church. Just before the marriage was final, just before the end of the wedding ceremony, he stopped. He looked up and he said, "I would like to announce that right after the wedding, there will be a watermelon cutting in the church basement. It will be 25 cents a slice, and for all of you economically minded people who order half a melon, the price will be $1.50. Then, without stopping, Reverend Johns continued, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The end came when Vernon Johns drove onto the campus of Alabama State University with a truckload of watermelons to sell. The Board of Deacons met after this event and recommended that the church end his ministry. In a tense meeting, the Dexter congregation agreed by majority vote. He continued to live in the parsonage. The board turned off the electricity and the gas. To keep warm, he burned back copies of the New York Times, to which he subscribed and had saved for years. He wore 2 or 3 sweaters to bed and several pairs of socks. Nevertheless, he shivered all night. His wife resigned her position as the music professor at Alabama State University and took a new position at a university in Virginia, leaving her husband in the cold parsonage. Johns finally left Montgomery and retired from the ministry. He was now in his early 60s, to live on a farm in Virginia. Now, in Virginia, he gave support and advice to his niece, Barbara Rose Johns. This 16-year-old was attending an all-black segregated school in Virginia, a high school. And she organized a student strike. She placed an anonymous phone call to the principal saying that there was a student in trouble at the police station and the principal needed to go there immediately. And the principal left the school, and with the principal out of the school, she called all 450 African American students to the auditorium where they announced that the school was now on strike and students were no longer going to attend classes until they received equal quality education compared to the white students in the other high schools. She was, of course, her friends were suspended and she was expelled from the high school for this student strike. But the NAACP agreed on her behalf to sue the school board on grounds of discrimination. And her case was consolidated with 4 other cases from around the country. And they became Brown versus the Board of Education. She was 16. But meanwhile, back in Alabama, at Dexter Baptist Church, the deacons were searching for a new minister. Now, search committees often make decisions based on their feelings about their previous minister. If they love their previous minister, they may try to find someone similar. But if the previous minister had a vision of the church that was different from most of the congregation, search committees will try to find a new minister who is completely different from the previous minister. Now, Vernon Johns was 56 years old when they first called him in 1948. To replace him, the deacons looked at a 25-year-old, right out of seminary, a graduate of Crozer Theological Seminary, the Baptist seminary located about 7 miles south of here. After Crozer, the young man had gone on to get a doctorate from Boston University School of Theology. He titled his dissertation, "A Comparison of the Conceptions of God in the Thinking of Paul Tillich and Henry Nelson Wyman." And Wyman was a Unitarian. This intellectual dissertation, now that looked good to the deacons, who were themselves often faculty at a black university in Montgomery. So shortly after his 25th birthday, on January 24th, 1954, the young man delivered a trial sermon at Dexter. As the pulpit committee shepherded him around the church, they told him stories about Vernon Johns, a militant guy who had exalted the congregation to get involved in social issues. They explained to the 25-year-old that members of Dexter tended to accept the status quo. The social action blacks, they said, went down the street to Reverend Ralph Abernathy's church. After the weekend visit, the deacons offered, and the young minister accepted the position at Dexter. His name, of course, was Martin Luther King Jr. During the first 15 months of King's ministry, he got to know the people of the church. He preached on Sundays. He reorganized the administration of the church. He expanded the programming of the church. He became friends with Ralph Abernathy, the young minister at First Baptist in Montgomery. Abernathy explained the difference between his church, First Baptist, and the Dexter Church. He said, Abernathy put it this way: at First Baptist, you may talk about Jesus. At Dexter Baptist, they would prefer that you talk about Plato or Socrates or somebody like that. And if you just happen to mention Jesus, they would like you to do it just as quietly and briefly as possible. These first 15 months of his ministry, getting to know the church and the community, were the most serene and uncomplicated of Reverend King's adult life. But the serenity ended on December 1st, 1955, when the police arrested Rosa Parks, an African-American woman, for her refusal to surrender her seat to a white person on a bus. 5 days later, King was elected president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. The evening of Monday, December 5th, 1955, the 26-year-old minister, whom his congregation had called and hoped that he would not be controversial, spoke to 5,000 people about the Montgomery bus boycott. He said, "No one must be intimidated to keep them from riding the buses. Our method must be persuasion, not coercion. We will only say to the people, let your conscience be your guide. Our actions must be guided by the deepest principles of the Christian faith. Once again, we must hear the words of Jesus, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despise you. If we fail to do this, our protests will end up as a meaningless drama on the stage of history, and its memory will be shrouded in the ugly garments of shame. If you protest courageously, and yet with dignity and Christian love, future historians will say, there lived a great people, black people, who injected new meaning, new dignity into the veins of civilization. Well, within weeks, the boycott tested his courage and his trust in nonviolence. The night of January 30th, 1956, in the middle of a speech to a mass meeting, he received word that someone had bombed the parsonage, the same parsonage that Vernon John had lived in. Someone had bombed the parsonage while his wife and baby girl were inside. He left the speaker's platform and went home immediately. At the parsonage, he found that his wife and child were all right. Around his home was a crowd of angry blacks, and he spoke. I want you to go home and put down your weapons. We cannot solve this problem through retaliatory violence. We must meet violence with nonviolence. Remember the words of Jesus, he who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. Remember, if I am stopped, this movement will not stop, because God is with this movement. Go home with this glowing faith and this radiant assurance. Now, these are some of the finest moments in the history of American religion. We know that Reverend King was not a perfect man. In the 1960s, the FBI circulated stories of King having affairs. In 1991, an academic inquiry concluded that King had plagiarized portions of his doctoral dissertation. Reverend King's sister, Christine Ferris, wrote, "My brother was no saint, but an average and ordinary man." And a close friend of Dr. King wrote that by exalting the accomplishments of Martin Luther King Jr. in a legendary tale that is annually told, we fail to recognize that his humanity, his personal and public struggles are similar to yours and to mine. Well, as you can see from this story, when a church calls a minister, knowing for sure what will happen next is impossible. Reverend Vernon Johns was a great preacher. He was a prophet with the courage to speak up about the injustices that he saw around him. Still, to put it mildly, he lacked diplomacy. In the end, this led to his departure. Dr. King was more of an intellectual, fitting in with the members who worked at Alabama State University. However, after Rosa Parks refused to move on that bus, Dr. King joined in supporting her, and he transformed his ministry and his life. As you think about who you would like as your next settled minister, I encourage you, I invite you to be open to many possibilities. There are older persons in our ministry, like Reverend John's, who are courageous, prophetic preachers. And they all have more diplomatic skills than Reverend John had. There are young students in our seminaries who have the potential for the kind of leadership that Dr. King had. None of these ministers, old or young, will be perfect. But each of them will have their own special strengths. So please be open to many possibilities. And know that after your new minister arrives, as time passes, there will be challenges you cannot predict and you cannot control. You and your next minister will face these challenges together. Let's sing our closing hymn, Amazing Grace. Please join with me in the closing words. For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affection. And for those who come to seek a path, may a way be found and the courage to take it, step by step. Blessed be.